They were given to us by the family. Also, we want to thank Larry. He got all the stuff from the Jewish synagogue, all the records and different items that they had up there at the synagogue. I think they are moving out, right?
No, they're probably going to remain, but they had to clear out a lot of material.
Yeah, they don't have as much space as they used to, right? Yeah. So we got that. We haven't got that out on display yet. We just got it. It's still up there in a box, but we'll get it out. Also, on the memberships, we started something new this year. We put colored slips in your membership because last year we had trouble getting members. I don't know we don't know what the problem was exactly, but we decided. We had a meeting and decided to put these colored slips in the envelopes so that everybody knew that it was time to re-up for the year with their dues. So I hope that helped everybody as far as membership goes, to get your money in on a timely basis. We really do need that money. We work off that money pretty much. So it's important to us that we get our dues in from all our members. So if there's anybody had any problems with that, let us know. It's something we tried and we think it works, but we want to get feedback and let us know if it really did help everybody. And other than that, I just wanted to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody. We won't be meeting again until January, so happy holidays also. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our program director, Deb Penrod.
I am the program committee. Before Larry starts, I just want to mention January's program will be, I think, January 21st, and it's going to be presented by Shannon Shefniski, who is our intern from Pottstown University. She's a history major under the supervision of Dr. Patty Durr, who's a professor at Pottstown. And her program will be taken from the paper she's been writing, her research thesis, which is on the transition in Pottstown from the industrial era fading out in about 1970 to the current post-industrial light industry. And I know that that's all very near and dear to our hearts, so I hope you'll come and listen to what she has to say. And she will take input from anybody. She would also love to talk to anybody who was laid off from Bethlehem Still, so if you know anybody or you're one of those folks, let me know and I'll put her in touch with you. Our speaker, before we go to our speaker, raise your hand if you have any affiliation at all with the Pottstown Firebirds.
Raise your hand.
Raise your hand. Okay.
Affiliation.
Did anybody here go to Pottstown Firebird games? Oh my God, I'm the only one. My excuse is I'm not from Pottstown. Remember that. The displays of material we have all around the building right now, we're going to be putting them together into a more formal, organized exhibition. But we've got a scrapbook down below that Larry's mom kept over all the years. We've got materials that have been loaned to us by Larry and from George Wasnock. We're going to be getting some materials from the estate of Hervey Nouse. So we're going to end up to be a fairly significant Pottstown Firebirds depot. If you find anything other than the shirt on your back, we don't want that right now. Please feel free to either loan it to us, let us scan it if it's a photograph of something or documents, or you can donate it to us. We've got membership brochures. If anyone here is not a member, it's $25 a person, $30 a couple. You get the honor of supporting the Historical Society in return for your dues, and you also get the newsletter. We have extra copies of the newsletter up above. There's a young man, I think I mentioned him in the press release, if you read our article. There's a young man in Texas. He's not much over 30 years old. His name is Bruno. And for whatever reason, he is thrilled to find it. He's been researching the Firebirds for years. He came to the States as a kid from Portugal with his dad on vacation one year, and he just zoomed in on this local team thing. He manages the PottsTownFirebirds.org website. He's got a Facebook page, and I scattered around some reminders about his self-published book that will be coming out at the end of the year. We will probably, I haven't told David this, but we'll probably buy a few copies to have here if you would like to repurchase them from us. But he's just crazy about the Firebirds, and I wish that we could have afforded to have flown him here for tonight, but I'm sure that he'll be in town at some point, probably next year or so. And so, I think that's everything on my list. There will be refreshments afterwards. If you'll hold your questions until the end, we've got snacks and cider and wine and beer. Specifically, the beer we have is Schmidt's, which we purchased from Frank Smith's Beverages today. They advertised, Frank Smith advertised loyally on the back page of the program for the entire 3 seasons that the Firebirds were in town. So if you're a real Firebirds fan, you gotta have a Schmidt. Larry Cohen. He's a Pottstown native, 5th generation Pottstonian. He ended up graduating from Perkiomen Valley in '72. Went to school at Dickinson, grad school in Chicago. But the thing about him that is most interesting to me is he worked for the State Department in the Foreign Service Office all over the world, like a dozen different countries. Now, I think the reason that appeals to me so much is I'm interested in anybody who's got diplomatic skill. I mean, I have none. So I think it's wonderful. But he worked for the State Department from 1980 to 2007. And some of his later placements were in Iraq, Afghanistan. So you want some interesting stories. I think he probably has some. He's also spoken here before about his book, Chicken Hill Chronicles, which is up the street from here. And the scrapbook down there, again, is thanks to his mom, who kept it all those years. So without any further anything, Larry.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deb, and thank you to everyone who's out here tonight. First of all, let me just clear up an error that was in the Mercury. The Firebirds were not a semi-pro team. They were a professional team. This was professional football. It wasn't semi-pro football. So the Mercury actually had that little detail wrong. So I just want to clear the air right off the bat. What I'm going to do now is give a kind of a history of the first year of the Firebirds. I'm not going to give any reminiscences because I may remember a few things. You'll all remember things that are different. I'm not trying to make this into a walk down memory lane. This is a historical overview of that first year of the Firebirds, 1968. Happens to be 50 years ago. Also, it's just coincidental that 1968 happened to be a very tumultuous year in the United States, as those of us who are old enough remember. So here you have 1968 turning out to be one of the rockiest years in the United States in U.S. history, and yet here in Pottstown we had this unique team that kind of grew up around us. It just certainly made things a lot different in Pottstown than in the rest of the country. So I think looking upon the Firebirds as a special event is really kind of what we're here tonight to go over. Okay, get this. So we'll start off the history of the Pottstown Firebirds with the beginning of 1968, January. A group of businessmen in town created a corporation called the Pottstown Professional Football Association, Inc. It was capitalized at $100,000, that's 10,000 shares at $10 each, minimum of 10 shares per stockholder. They identified an office, 23 South Hanover Street. If anybody knows 23 South Hanover Street, it no longer exists. It's now a parking lot behind the old Security Trust Company building. But in 1968, it had just been vacated by Sheridan's, which had moved across the street on Hanover Street. So the building was vacant, and that became the first office, that became the office for the Pottstown Firebirds. Now, in March 1968, you had this organization, but they really didn't have any affiliation. They didn't have any recognition. They had to go to get recognition to become an affiliate of the Atlantic Coast Football League. That was their objective, to become a team in this league. Consider it was a minor league affiliated with the NFL and the AFL, the National Football League and the American Football League. You had 8 teams shifting around each year. Certain teams would fold, there's other teams would move, based in cities like Bridgeport, Connecticut, Richmond, Virginia, Harrisburg, Westchester up above New York City, Lowell, Massachusetts, places like that. So usually places that were relatively more populated than Pottstown. The commissioner of the Atlantic Coast Football League was a guy by the name of Cosmo Iacovazzi. He lived in Scranton, and he made the determination that Pottstown deserved a football team, and he said specifically that, this is quoted in the newspaper, "I thought it was impossible, that is, impossible that a town like Pottstown could become an affiliate for a professional football team. I thought it was impossible, but I investigated the situation and was so impressed with the spirit of the Pottstown people, civic and sports-minded." Okay, so Cosmo decided, or made the decision to award the franchise to Pottstown. Allegedly, there were other cities that were interested in a franchise, but Pottstown got the franchise. And this is the first meeting of the press conference of the board of directors, of the first board of directors of the Firebirds. They announced that they were going to become a part of the Atlantic Coast Football League, and they also announced that they were going to sell shares. Now, $100,000 capitalization, even, I mean, today it sounds like nothing, but even in 1968, clearly was insufficient. So they started out really undercapitalized from the very get-go. They had the public meeting about 2 weeks later on March 26th, an open public meeting at the Elks home on High Street. And they introduced the first players that they were going to sign up for this team. The first players they announced, Lou Morta and John Fry, 2 players who had come out of Villanova. And by the way, Villanova has a very strong relationship with the early Pottstown Firebirds. A lot of players came out of Villanova. Also, this man right here, Dave DiFilippo, was introduced as the new head coach. He was a Villanova, had gone to Villanova and also had played with the Philadelphia Eagles in the 1940s. Fairly well known in the Philadelphia area. Also had been involved with the Philadelphia Bulldogs that had already folded. That was in the Continental League. It was a professional league that didn't survive beyond the late 60s. So had the rollout, the initial players were presented. Over the course of the next few weeks and months, you had a number of other players who were then presented. Usually it would be a rollout, and it would be announced in the Pottstown Mercury that, you know, so-and-so was signed. Many of them had local connections. You also had to put together a coaching staff. Dave DiFilippo identified people that he had known from the Bulldogs and from other teams in the AFL and NFL, coaches who were looking for jobs. Carmen Cavelli, Joe Rogers, who would be the defensive coach, and then probably the biggest name that he could possibly find, Steve Van Buren. Anybody who knew football knew Steve Van Buren. He had played for the Philadelphia Eagles. He had served, he was the star running back in their championship seasons of 1947 or 1948 and 1949. And he was a recently installed member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Everybody knew Steve Van Buren. And this gave the team, I believe, a lot of some gravitas, some legitimacy by having as one of their coaches a legitimate Hall of Famer on the staff. Now, over the course of the spring, hoopla was starting to build, players were being signed up, and the office at 23 South Hanover Street had its formal opening, its hard opening, on June 14th. And at that opening, you had Eaglettes, that is the Philadelphia Eagle cheerleaders, they were called the Eaglettes. You also had, at the opening, you had Sam Baker and Izzy Lang. You had Gary Ballman, who were at the time players on the Philadelphia Eagles. So here you have, the Eagles. They were formally announced as the affiliate for the Pottstown Firebirds. The Firebirds would be then the minor league affiliate for the Philadelphia Eagles. So you had the Eagles come and participate in the opening of the office. Again, the continuation during the next few weeks of other players that were being signed. You had from Grambling, you had Tom Ross, Bob Smith, and Walt Hughes, who had actually, I think, came up together because that summer my father and I think my mother and my brother were at the Holiday Inn for dinner one Saturday evening, and we saw these three big guys, African Americans obviously for football players, and my father went up to them and found out that they had come up from Grambling. So you had players coming in from all over the country to try out for this brand new team, the Firebirds. Also signed at this time, you had a quarterback from Franklin Marshall, Zeke Morano. You had flanker out of Continental Bulldogs, out of the Philadelphia Bulldogs of the Continental League, John Drew. Buddy Allen, from Utah State, who had played a season with the Denver Broncos, so he had AFL experience. And also a man by the name of Mark Cosmos out of Oklahoma University. Now, Mark Cosmos was pretty special in the eyes of Dave DiFilippo. He, quote, this is in the newspaper, he, quote, said, "This boy has the best shot of being a great star in the Atlantic Coast Conference." And those happen to be very prescient words because Mark Cosmos became an all-star in the ACFL as playing for the Pottstown Firebirds. They also said that the coaches on the Firebirds could not remember a better big league prospect. Now, skipping forward here, Mark Cosmos did not go into the National Football League. The Philadelphia Eagles didn't take him because they thought he was too short. They had a linebacker at the time who frankly was inferior. So Cosmos went up to Canada and joined the Canadian Football League and became a star in the Canadian Football League. I believe he played for the Montreal Alouettes. He had a very successful career in Canada. But it's kind of ironic that he would have been an excellent ball player had the Eagles taken him, and it's unfortunate that they did not. You also had at this time a big effort at public relations. And one of the public relations focuses was on getting the Fire Bells organized. This would be the equivalent to the Eaglettes. The Pottstown Firebirds, they hastily recruited 40 young ladies between the ages of 18 and 22, although I did find that the newspaper indicated that the Fire Bell of the Year was 16 years old. I'm not sure how that happened. You notice they're all wearing these white lizard stretch boots. Those boots came from the Desco Shoe Company in Augusta, Maine, and the boots were ordered from Augusta, Maine, for an event that was happening at like the next day. So Johnny Basco and Arlen Saylor flew up to Maine, to the Augusta, to the shoe company to pick up 40 pairs of lizard stretch boots, and then flew back to Pottstown. And so it was a very good fit. It says, "Two fashionable Firebells try on their new lizard skin stretch boots just delivered by air from the Desco Shoe Corporation in Augusta, Maine. Show our bomb squad members Linda and Sandy Idell living on Diamond Street." The carton contained 42 pairs of boots that were needed by the next day. So this was all the hoopla that was going on during the late spring and summer of 1968, building up the anticipation for the Firebirds. Now, the Firebirds summer training camp opened on July 7th. Their practice field, anybody know where the practice field was? The Hill School. The far lots at the far practice fields at the Hill School, which I believe now has been turned into a, I don't know what it's lacrosse, but the players practice on those fields at the Hill School, but their locker room was at the high school, and the high school locker room reportedly was somewhat inferior, didn't have enough showers. They had to take turns getting into the showers. Of course, locker room was not designed for all these big guys. So, from what I understand, they certainly had to squeeze in when they returned to the locker room. But the excitement, the Pottstown Mercury, literally every week would have these feature stories about the players, talking about who came to Pottstown, who was just signed. Also, at this time, Ed Gruber became a very big part of the Pottstown Firebirds. Now, it's a little foggy exactly when he took over the Firebirds, but from the get-go, it was clear that the Firebirds were short of money. In fact, I would say that if they didn't have Ed Gruber, they would have been bankrupted before they even had their first game. Gruber came along. He was defined as the largest stockholder of the Firebirds. He wasn't initially described as owner. He was described as largest stockholder of the Firebirds. The reason for that is because the Firebirds were deemed a publicly owned team. That the idea that they would model themselves on the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay being the only NFL team which was publicly owned. And the Firebirds modeled themselves on the Packers as far as their ownership structure, clearly undercapitalized. There wasn't enough money to pay all the salaries, let alone the other expenses. And so at some point, late spring or so, Ed Gruber really took over. But for a while, he was just defined as major stockholder. He later on became, clearly owner. But he was in charge at a pretty early date of what was going on with the Firebirds. The president of the Firebirds was Chuz Calvario. And anybody who remembers Chuz, describe him as Mr. Football. Chuz had the Texaco station at Beach and Charlotte Street, C&K, Texaco. And he actually was certainly an incredible asset to the Firebirds. But by the summer of '68, it was not his team, it was Ed Gruber's team. That summer also, Ed Gruber had gave I'm not sure if it was a charitable cause or exactly what he did, but he had a group of youngsters who attended the practices called Gruber's Firebells. Fireflies. We had the Firebells. His kids were called the Fireflies, and they would attend the practices at the practice field, and I believe also they became spectators at the games that were to be played. Throughout the summer, as I said, a lot of efforts at promoting the Firebirds, trying to sell stock, trying to generate season ticket sales. And one of the events that took place that summer was the visit to Pottstown of Eddie Feiner